The city of Oakhaven was a grid of neon and rain, but inside Le Summit, the world was painted in shades of gold, cream, and ego. It was the kind of restaurant where the menus didn't feature prices and the lighting was dimmed specifically to hide the age of the billionaires and the desperation of the socialites. Arthur Pendelton sat in his usual spot, booth 4. It was tucked into a velvet-lined corner that offered a strategic view of the entire floor while remaining shrouded in shadow. Arthur was a man of 35 who carried the weight of a 50-year-old's empire. As the head of Pendelton Holdings, his life was a meticulously curated series of movements. He didn't just walk, he navigated. He didn't just speak, he issued directives. Tonight, he was dressed in a charcoal silk wool blend blazer, a bespoke piece from a tailor in Milan who only took 3 clients a year. It was a garment of absolute precision, much like the man himself. He was celebrating, if you could call it that, the closing of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition of a tech firm. His celebration consisted of a single, quiet dinner and a bottle of 1982 Chateau Petrus. He watched the ballet of the waitstaff. They moved with a rehearsed grace, gliding between tables like ghosts in tuxedos. But there was one discordant note in the symphony: a young man, barely 24, with hair that refused to stay slicked back and a jacket that was half a size too large. This was Elias. Arthur watched him through the rim of his crystal water glass. Elias wasn't like the others. The other waiters had a practiced coldness, a robotic efficiency that suggested they viewed the guests as nothing more than walking bank accounts. Elias, however, looked human. He looked exhausted. There was a slight tremor in his hands as he polished silver at the side station, and his eyes kept darting toward the kitchen door with a look of quiet dread. Arthur respected work, but he demanded excellence. He saw the fatigue in the boy and made a mental note: the management is overworking the junior staff. Efficiency is dropping. The sommelier arrived first, presenting the Petrus with the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic. The cork was drawn with a faint, satisfying pop, and the deep, ruby liquid was decanted. The aroma, earthy, dark cherry, and cedar, wafted toward Arthur. It was a $4,000 bottle of liquid history. "Shall I pour, Monsieur Pendelton?" the sommelier whispered. "No," Arthur replied, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "Let it breathe. I'll have the waiter bring it to the table in 10 minutes. The sommelier bowed and retreated. A few minutes later, Elias was signaled by the head captain. Arthur saw the boy take a deep breath, smoothing his apron. He approached the decanter, his movements hesitant. He placed the heavy crystal vessel onto a silver tray along with a single glass. As Elias began his trek across the dining room toward booth 4, the atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to shift. The air grew heavy. Arthur noticed a busboy, rushing in the opposite direction, fail to yield the right of way. At the same time, a wealthy patron at a nearby table laughed boisterously, throwing his arm back and clipping the edge of Elias's path. It happened in what felt like slow motion, the kind of temporal distortion that only occurs during a car crash or a fall from grace. Elias's left heel caught on a slightly upturned corner of the Persian rug. It was a fraction of an inch, a microscopic error in a world of supposed perfection. His body lurched forward. He tried to compensate, his muscles tensing, but the silver tray was slick. The decanter, top-heavy and filled with the priceless 82 vintage, began to slide. Arthur didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply watched the trajectory. The crystal decanter hit the edge of Arthur's table first, shattering with a sound like a gunshot. A spray of glass shards danced across the white linen, but the main event was the wine. A tidal wave of deep, blood-red liquid erupted from the broken vessel. It didn't just splash, it conquered. The Petrus soaked into the lapel of Arthur's charcoal blazer. It seeped into the fine weave of his Egyptian cotton shirt. It dripped from the hem of his jacket onto his polished Oxfords. The scent of the wine, once elegant, now felt cloying and violent. The entire restaurant, a room filled with the most powerful people in the state, went utterly, terrifyingly silent. The only sound was the rhythmic drip, 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 of $4,000 worth of fermented grapes hitting the floor. Elias stood there, his hands still raised as if he were holding a tray that was no longer there. His face had gone from a pale white to a ghostly translucent. He looked at Arthur's chest, then at Arthur's face. He looked like a man standing before a firing squad. Elias's voice cracked, barely audible. Oh God. Sir. Arthur looked down at his ruined suit. The stain was spreading, a dark, jagged map of failure across his heart. He felt the cold dampness reaching his skin. In his world, a mistake like this was more than an accident, it was a breach of the order of things. The silence was broken not by Arthur, but by the frantic, heavy footsteps of Mr. Sterling, the restaurant's general manager. Sterling arrived like a storm cloud, his face twisted into a mask of performative outrage. He didn't check to see if Elias was hurt by the shattered glass. He didn't even immediately offer Arthur a napkin. Instead, he turned his full, vitriolic fury on the boy. "You incompetent, clumsy idiot!" Sterling barked, his voice echoing off the gold-leafed ceiling. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea who this is?" Elias was shaking now, his knees visibly trembling. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling, the rug, I tripped. I'll pay for it, I'll pay for it." Sterling let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "You couldn't pay for the dry cleaning on that jacket if you worked here for 5 years. And that wine? That wine costs more than your life is worth." Sterling turned to Arthur, his expression shifting instantly from rage to a grotesque, oily smile. "Mr. Pendelton, please, accept my deepest, most humble apologies. This creature will be removed immediately. We will, of course, cover the cost of the suit, and your meal and any future meals are on the house." "I am mortified. Truly." Arthur finally looked up. He didn't look at Sterling. He looked at Elias. The boy was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. He looked small. He looked like the world had finally succeeded in crushing him. "You're fired," Sterling snapped back at Elias, pointing a trembling finger toward the kitchen. "Get your things and get out. Don't let me see you in this neighborhood again, or I'll have the police involved for the damages." Arthur Pendelton reached out and picked up a single shard of glass from the table. He turned it over in his fingers, the edge sharp enough to draw blood. He felt a cold, familiar spark of something in his chest. It wasn't anger at the wine. It wasn't annoyance at the suit. It was a profound, icy distaste for the man standing over the boy. Arthur set the glass shard down with a delicate clink. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief, slowly dabbing at a drop of wine on his wrist. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, his voice quiet, yet somehow louder than the manager's shouting had been. "Yes, Mr. Pendelton? Whatever you need. We have a private room where you can change, I can send a runner to your home for a fresh suit." "Be quiet," Arthur said. The room went silent again. Arthur stood up, the red stain on his chest looking like a fresh wound. He looked at the ruined 82 Petrus on the floor and then looked Sterling dead in the eye. "The disaster isn't the wine, Sterling," Arthur said. "The disaster is you." Sterling's face underwent a fascinating and grotesque transformation. His oily, practiced smile didn't so much fade as it curdled, twisting into a look of profound confusion. He was a man who lived by a hierarchy of wealth. In his mind, Arthur should have been his ally in the crusade against the lower-class incompetence of the staff. "Mr. Pendelton," Sterling stammered, his voice dropping an octave as he tried to regain his footing. I think there's been a misunderstanding. This boy has caused you $1,000 in dry cleaning and $4,000 in lost inventory. My duty is to protect the standards of Le Summit. We cannot have such filth ruining the experience of our most valued guests. Arthur didn't blink. He reached down and picked up a linen napkin, not to wipe the wine, but to carefully move a shard of crystal that had landed near his water glass. You speak of standards, Sterling, but you possess none. A leader takes the hit for his team. A coward finds a scapegoat. Arthur's gaze shifted past Sterling to where Elias stood. The young waiter was still paralyzed, his hands trembling so violently that a fellow staff member had to gently take the empty silver tray from him. Elias looked like a man who had just watched his entire future evaporate into a red puddle on the floor. Go to the back, Elias, Arthur said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man known as the Iron Shark of Wall Street. Clean the glass off your shoes. You're bleeding. Elias looked down. In the chaos, a shard of the decanter had sliced through the cheap leather of his work shoe, and a small trail of crimson real blood this time was mixing with the spilled Petrus. He looked up at Arthur, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes, before bowing his head and retreating toward the kitchen doors. He's not going back to clean up, sir, Sterling hissed, his ego finally overriding his caution. He's going back to collect his final paycheck. I've already terminated him. Now, if you'll follow me to the VIP lounge, I'll have a fresh shirt brought. I'm not going anywhere with you, Arthur interrupted. He pulled a sleek, obsidian black smartphone from his pocket. The screen glowed against his palm. In fact, I find I've lost my appetite for your food. But I've suddenly developed a very keen interest in your real estate. Arthur turned his back on the manager, ignoring the man's sputtering protests. He scrolled through a list of encrypted contacts until he found the one labeled Marcus, Acquisitions. He hit the call button and placed the phone to his ear, stepping away from the table and toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the rain-slicked city. Marcus, Arthur said when the line picked up. I'm at Le Summit. Who owns the building? A brief silence followed as Marcus, a man who could find the secret bank accounts of a ghost in under 3 minutes, tapped away at a keyboard on the other side of the city. The property is held by a holding company called Gilt Edge Realty, Arthur. The restaurant's operating license belongs to a man named Henry Varga. Why? Are you having the duck? I'm having a problem, Arthur replied, his eyes fixed on a drop of wine that was slowly traveling down his sleeve. I want the deed to the building. I want the license. I want the brand. And I want them in the next 60 minutes. Varga is over-leveraged on his project in Dubai, he needs liquidity. Offer him 20% over current market value, but tell him the offer expires the moment I finish my next glass of water. Consider it done, Marcus replied, not even questioning the insanity of the request. He knew that when Arthur Pendelton decided to buy something, the world usually moved out of his way. Arthur hung up and tucked the phone away. He felt the cold, damp weight of the wine against his chest, but he didn't care. To him, this wasn't about a suit. It was about the architecture of power. He had spent his life watching men like Sterling treat people like Elias as disposable parts in a machine, and tonight, Arthur had decided to break the machine. He began to walk toward the kitchen. Behind the swinging double doors of the kitchen, the atmosphere was a cacophony of shouting, clattering pans, and the humid scent of searing fat. It was a world away from the hushed elegance of the dining room. In a small, cramped corner near the industrial dishwashers, Elias was sitting on a plastic crate. He had his shoe off, pressing a piece of rough paper towel against the cut on his foot. His eyes were red, though he wasn't crying anymore. He was past crying, he was in the hollow, numb state of a person who knew that tomorrow's rent was now an impossible math problem. You really did it this time, kid, a line cook muttered as he walked past, throwing a sympathetic but wary glance at him. Sterling was looking for a reason to axe the scholar anyway. I tripped, Elias whispered to himself. The rug. I told them about that rug 3 weeks ago. Suddenly, the kitchen doors burst open. Sterling marched in, his face purple with a mix of adrenaline and lingering fear. He spotted Elias and pointed a trembling finger. "You! Why are you still here? I told you to get out." Sterling screamed over the noise of the exhaust fans. The kitchen went quiet. The chefs paused their knives, the dishwashers stopped their spraying. I'm fixing my foot, sir," Elias said, trying to stand up, his voice shaking. "I don't care if your leg is falling off. You've embarrassed me in front of the most powerful man in the city. Do you have any idea who Arthur Pendelton is? He could have this place shut down with a phone call, and if he does, I will personally see to it that you never work in this industry again, not even as a janitor." Sterling stepped closer, invading Elias's personal space. He grabbed the boy's backpack from the hook and threw it onto the wet floor. "Get out. Now. Before I call security and have you dragged out in handcuffs for property damage." Elias reached for his bag, his fingers brushed with the gray, soapy water of the kitchen floor. He felt a deep, burning shame, the kind that stays in the marrow of your bones. He had worked 80 hours a week, picked up every double shift, and stayed late to polish every copper pot, all to support his sister's tuition. And now, because of a loose thread on a rug and a $4,000 bottle of fermented juice, it was over. "He isn't going anywhere, Sterling." The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the hum of the kitchen like a razor. Arthur Pendelton stood in the doorway. He looked entirely out of place, a billionaire in a ruined suit, standing in a room of steam and stainless steel. But the authority he radiated was absolute. Sterling turned, his eyes widening. "Mr. Pendelton." "Sir, please, don't trouble yourself with the back of house. This trash is just leaving. I was just ensuring he didn't steal any silver on his way out." Arthur walked forward, his expensive shoes clicking on the industrial tile. He stopped next to Elias. He looked at the boy's wet backpack, then at the blood-stained paper towel on the floor. "The thing about being a manager, Sterling," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low, "is that you are responsible for the environment you create. You ignored the safety of your staff, you berated a subordinate in public, and you lied to me about your standards." Arthur's phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out, glanced at the screen, a simple text from Marcus: "The keys are yours. Documents in your inbox." Arthur looked back at Sterling, and for the first time that night, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just finished the hunt. "I have some news for you, Sterling. News that I think the entire kitchen should hear." Arthur turned to the assembled staff, who were watching the scene with bated breath. "As of 30 seconds ago, LE Summit has changed hands. I am the new owner of this building, this brand, and every single contract within it." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sound of the boiling pot seemed to die down. Sterling's jaw dropped. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. "Now," Arthur said, turning back to the manager, "about that termination you were so eager to finalize." Sterling's face, previously a mask of aristocratic arrogance, began to crumble. It was a slow, agonizing process. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickly, mottled gray. He looked at Arthur's phone as if it were a thermal detonator. You bought the restaurant." Sterling's voice was a ghost of its former self, thin and reedy. "In 60 minutes? Mr. Pendelton, that's not how real estate works. There are boards, there are signatures, there are millions of dollars," Arthur interrupted, his voice as smooth as polished obsidian. "And there are people who need those millions more than they need a failing, mid-tier French bistro with a liability for a manager. Henry Varga had 3 outstanding loans with Pendleton-affiliated banks. I didn't just buy the restaurant, Sterling. I bought his debt. I am now your landlord, your employer, and your worst nightmare. Arthur stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on a stray piece of rock salt on the kitchen floor. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the head chef, a grizzled man named Marco who looked like he hadn't slept since the late 90s. Chef Marco, I presume? Arthur asked. The chef nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a grease-stained apron. Yes, sir. Is the rug in the dining room a known hazard? Marco glanced at Sterling, then back at Arthur. A flicker of defiance lit up in the chef's tired eyes. 3 reports in 2 months, Mr. Pendelton. The kid Elias, he wasn't the first to trip. Just the first to trip in front of someone who mattered. Arthur turned his gaze back to Sterling. The manager was shaking now. He looked at the kitchen staff, seeking an ally, but found only cold, hard stares. He had ruled through fear and petty cruelty, and now, the walls were closing in. Mr. Pendelton, please, Sterling began, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of supplication. I was only looking out for the brand. If word gets out that we allow such clumsiness, the critics will tear us apart. I've dedicated 10 years to this floor. You've dedicated 10 years to building a monument to your own ego, Arthur said. He reached out and plucked the gold-plated general manager pin from Sterling's lapel. The pin came away with a sharp rip of fabric. You didn't see a young man who was overworked and injured. You saw a chance to feel powerful. That is the one thing I cannot tolerate in my organizations. Arthur turned to the kitchen door and whistled a sharp, commanding sound. 2 men in dark, nondescript suits, who had been waiting in the shadows of the alleyway entrance, stepped into the light. These were Arthur's personal security, men who moved with the silent efficiency of apex predators. Escort Mr. Sterling to the curb, Arthur commanded. He is not to take anything but the clothes on his back. My legal team will courier his personal belongings to his residence by tomorrow morning. If he attempts to contact any member of the staff, or if he is seen within 2 blocks of this establishment, I want him processed for trespassing. You can't do this. Sterling shrieked as the 2 security guards gripped his elbows. They didn't use excessive force, they didn't need to. Their presence alone was an immovable wall. I have a contract. I have rights. You have a severance package consisting of exactly $0, per the gross misconduct clause I just had added to the buyout agreement, Arthur replied, already turning his back on the man. Goodbye, Sterling. Try not to trip on the way out. The kitchen watched in stunned, cathartic silence as Sterling was hauled away. The man who had been the terror of their work lives for a decade was gone in a matter of seconds. Arthur then turned his attention to the plastic crate where Elias was still sitting. The boy looked overwhelmed, his eyes darting between the billionaire and the exit. He looked like he wanted to run, but his injured foot kept him anchored. Elias, Arthur said. Yes, sir. How long have you worked here? 2 years, Mr. Pendelton. I started as a busboy. I worked my way up to server 6 months ago. Elias swallowed hard. I'm really sorry about the Petrus. I know it's worth more than, well, more than everything I own. Arthur looked at the red stain on his own chest, then at the boy's blood-stained sock. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, platinum fountain pen and a small notepad. He scribbled something quickly and handed the paper to Chef Marco. Chef, call my private physician. The number is there. Tell him to meet Elias at the clinic on 5th Avenue in 20 minutes. He's to be treated for the laceration and given a full physical. Send the bill to my personal office. Wait, Sir. Elias started to protest, but Arthur held up a hand. I'm not finished, Arthur said. He walked over to the industrial sink and rinsed his hands, drying them on a clean towel. The restaurant is closed for the rest of the night. Chef Marco, pay the staff double for the shift and tell them to go home to their families. We reopen in 48 hours. What's the plan, sir? Marco asked, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. The plan is a renovation, Arthur said. Starting with the rugs. And the leadership. He looked back at Elias. Elias, once you're patched up, I want you at my office at 8 a.m. sharp on Thursday. Don't wear a uniform. Wear something you feel comfortable in. Sir, I don't understand, Elias whispered. You fired the manager because he was mean to me, but I still broke the wine. I still failed at my job. Arthur Pendelton walked over and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. It was the first time anyone in that building had touched Elias with anything other than disdain. In my world, Elias, people focus on the spill. They focus on the loss. But I focus on the reaction. When you fell, you didn't look for someone else to blame. You didn't point at the rug. You didn't point at the busboy. You took the weight of the mistake on your own shoulders, even when someone was screaming in your ear. Arthur's eyes were like steel, but there was a flicker of something human behind them, a memory, perhaps, of a time when he was the one on the floor. Honesty is a more expensive vintage than Petrus, Elias. And it's much harder to find. I'm not rewarding you for spilling wine. I'm investing in a man who knows how to stand back up. Arthur turned to leave, his wine-soaked blazer fluttering behind him like a cape of dried blood. 8 a.m., Elias, Arthur called out over his shoulder as he pushed through the kitchen doors. And don't be late. We have a restaurant to rebuild. As Arthur stepped back into the rain of Oakhaven, his driver, a silent man named Miller, opened the door of the black Cullinan. Rough night, sir? Miller asked, noticing the state of the blazer. Arthur climbed into the leather-scented sanctuary of the car. He looked out at the glowing sign of Le Summit, which flickered once and then went dark as the kitchen staff began to shut down the power. No, Miller, Arthur said, leaning his head back and closing his eyes. Actually, I think it's the best dinner I've had in years. Tell the tailor I'll need a new suit. Something bold. The car pulled away into the night, leaving the shattered glass and the old regime behind. The takeover was complete, but for Arthur Pendelton and Elias, the real work was just beginning. Elias adjusted the collar of his only nice shirt, a button-down he'd bought for a cousin's wedding that was slightly frayed at the cuffs. He looked at his reflection in the polished chrome of the elevator doors. He didn't look like he belonged in a billion-dollar empire. He looked like a kid who was about to be told the invitation from 2 nights ago was a practical joke. The doors chimed and slid open to reveal the 80th floor. The lobby was an expanse of white marble and minimalist art. A woman with hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful looked up from a desk that appeared to be carved from a single block of obsidian. Name? She asked, her voice as cool as the air conditioning. Elias. Elias Thorne. I have an appointment with Mr. Pendelton. For 8:00 a.m. The receptionist didn't check a book. She simply nodded. Mr. Pendelton is expecting you. Third door on the left, Mr. Thorne. Elias walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing. He pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into an office that looked less like a workplace and more like a command center for the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 270-degree view of Oakhaven. The rain from Tuesday had cleared, leaving the city sparkling under a crisp morning sun. Arthur Pendelton was standing by the window, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He was wearing a navy blue suit today, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb the light. He didn't turn around immediately. The city looks different from up here, doesn't it, Elias? Arthur said. It looks small, sir, Elias replied honestly. Arthur turned, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. It is small. People down there think their problems are mountains. From here, they're just pebbles. But even a pebble can trip a giant if it's in the wrong place. Arthur gestured to a leather chair. Sit. Did the doctor look at your foot?
Yes, sir.
3 stitches and a tetanus shot. He said I'll be fine in a week.
Thank you, for that.
And for everything else. Arthur sat behind his desk, which was completely clear except for a single manila folder. I didn't bring you here for gratitude, Elias. I brought you here for a transition. Have you ever wondered why I dine at Le Summit? The food is mediocre. The decor is dated. The wine list is overpriced. Elias blinked, confused. Then why go, sir?
Because of the staff, Arthur said, tapping the folder.
I've been watching that restaurant for 6 months. Most of the servers are terrified. They make mistakes because they're looking over their shoulders for Sterling. But you were different. You were tired, yes. You were overworked. But you treated the busboys with respect. You walked the floor like you cared about the guests' evening, not just their tip. And when you spilled that wine, you didn't flinch. You looked me in the eye. Arthur pushed the folder across the desk. Elias opened it. Inside were blueprints, a brand strategy, and a contract. At the top of the page, in elegant gold lettering, was the new name of the establishment, the Pendelton and Vine. I don't just buy businesses to own them, Elias. I buy them to fix them, Arthur explained. Sterling is gone. The old prestige model is dead. The Pendelton and Vine will be a place of excellence, but it will be built on a foundation of dignity. No more toxic management. No more ignoring safety hazards. No more treating staff like disposable napkins. Elias scanned the contract. His eyes stopped at a line near the bottom. His breath hitched. General Manager. Elias whispered. Mr. Pendelton, I've never even been a shift lead. I'm a waiter. I know how to carry a tray and decant wine. I don't know how to run a multi-million-dollar business. You know how to lead people, Arthur countered, his voice firm. I can hire a dozen MBAs to do the accounting. I can hire a consultant to fix the supply chain. What I can't hire, what I can't teach La Suchin truck, is integrity. You have that. You stayed to help the dishwashers after your shift. You defended a junior cook when Sterling tried to dock his pay last month. I know these things because I pay attention. Arthur stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against it. I'm going to provide you with a team. A head of operations, a marketing lead, and a legal advisor. They will teach you the business part. But you will be the heart of the restaurant. You will set the tone. You will ensure that no one waiter or guest is ever treated the way you were treated on Tuesday night. Elias looked at the contract, then back at the view of the city. He thought about his sister, working 2 jobs to finish her degree. He thought about the tiny, damp apartment they shared. He thought about the years he'd spent being invisible, a ghost in a tuxedo serving the elite. Why me? Elias asked, his voice cracking. There are 1,000 people more qualified. Because you were the only one who didn't lie, Arthur said. When that wine hit my suit, everyone in that room waited for a lie. Sterling waited to blame the rug. The sommelier waited to blame the tray. You simply said, I am sorry. That's a rare vintage, Elias. And I'm a collector of rare things. Arthur reached out and offered his hand. The salary is 4 times what you were making as a server, plus a percentage of the quarterly profits. You'll have a clothing allowance, a car, and a direct line to my office. In exchange, I want that restaurant to be the best in the city by Christmas. Do we have a deal? Elias felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of terror and pure, unadulterated hope. He stood up, his legs feeling steadier than they had in years. He reached out and shook Arthur Pendleton's hand. The grip was firm, a bridge between 2 very different worlds. We have a deal, sir, Elias said. Good, Arthur said, dropping his hand and turning back to the window. Now, go see my assistant, Sarah. She's waiting downstairs with the tailor. You're going to need a new suit, Elias. People find it easier to follow a man who looks like he knows where he's going. As Elias walked out of the office, his head spinning, he realized he wasn't the same person who had entered the elevator 10 minutes ago. The waiter who had spilled the wine was gone. In his place was a man who had just been given the keys to a kingdom. Downstairs, in a private lounge, a tailor was already waiting with measuring tapes and swatches of fabric. As Elias stood on the small wooden pedestal, being measured for a bespoke charcoal wool blazer oddly similar to the one he had ruined, Sarah, Arthur's assistant, handed him a set of keys and a black titanium credit card. "Mr. Pendelton doesn't do things by halves, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said with a professional smile. "There is a car waiting for you in the garage. A silver Audi. It's yours to use for business. Your first meeting with the design team is at 2 p.m. back at the restaurant. I suggest you get some lunch. Somewhere expensive." Elias held the heavy metal card in his hand. He thought about the Petrus. He thought about the red stain. He realized that sometimes, the things we break are exactly what need to be broken for something better to be built in the ruins. The transformation of Elias Thorne had begun. And the city of Oakhaven was about to find out exactly what happens when a billionaire decides to turn a clumsy boy into a titan. Oakhaven was gripped by a picturesque winter. Snow drifted lazily past the streetlights, dusting the sidewalks in a pristine white that hid the grime of the city beneath. But on the corner of 5th and Sterling, a street name Arthur found deliciously ironic, the glow from the windows of the newly christened the Pendelton and Vine was warm enough to melt the ice for blocks. The grand reopening was not the typical gala of the city's elite. While the mayors, the CEOs, and the influencers were all there, the guest list also included the families of the kitchen staff, the neighborhood's local shop owners, and even a few of the regular bus riders who used to look at the old restaurant with a sense of exclusion. Arthur had insisted, "This isn't a museum for the rich, it's a sanctuary for the soulful." Inside, the transformation was staggering. Gone were the oppressive gold leaf ceilings and the dusty velvet drapes that smelled of old secrets. The space was now an architectural masterpiece of reclaimed wood, industrial steel, and warm, amber lighting. The air didn't smell like pretension, it smelled of rosemary, charred oak, and genuine hospitality. At the center of it all stood Elias Thorne. He was no longer the trembling boy in an oversized jacket. He wore a tailored midnight blue suit that moved with him like a second skin. His hair was neatly styled, but he had kept the approachable, honest smile that had first caught Arthur's eye. He moved through the dining room with a quiet, magnetic authority. He didn't just manage the floor, he breathed with it. He adjusted a silverware setting here, shared a laugh with a regular there, and kept a sharp eye on the kitchen doors, not out of fear, but out of pride. Arthur Pendelton sat at his usual spot, now officially labeled Booth 4, watching the scene with the silent satisfaction of a master watchmaker. He wasn't wearing his charcoal blazer tonight. He wore a simple, elegant turtleneck and a coat draped over the back of his chair. "The sea base is excellent tonight, sir," Elias said, appearing at Arthur's side. He didn't bow, he stood as an equal. "Chef Marco added a touch of citrus from the new supplier you approved." "I trust your palate, Elias," Arthur replied, taking a sip of water. "How is the team holding up?" "They're happy, Mr. Pendelton. No one is looking over their shoulder. We had a runner drop a tray of appetizers 10 minutes ago in the lounge. Do you know what happened?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Tell me." 3 other servers ran over to help him clean it up. No one shouted. No one was fired. They just worked together. The guest actually tipped the runner extra for his composed recovery. Arthur nodded slowly. "That is the return on investment I was looking for." Suddenly, the heavy oak front doors swung open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and a swirl of snow. A man stumbled in, his coat tattered and his face flushed red from the cold. He looked like a shadow of a human being, unshaven, frantic, and smelling of cheap gin. It was Sterling. The room didn't go silent this time, but a ripple of unease traveled through the nearby tables. Sterling looked around the beautiful, thriving space with eyes full of bitterness and desperation. He hadn't worked in a high-end restaurant since the night Arthur bought the building. The Iron Shark had ensured that Sterling's reputation for toxicity followed him to every corner of the industry. He spotted Elias and began to march toward him, his fingers shaking. "You!" Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "Look at you. Playing dress up in a dead man's shoes. You think you're a manager? You're a clumsy little brat who got lucky." Elias didn't flinch. He didn't call for security. He simply stepped forward, putting himself between Sterling and the guests. "Hello, Mr. Sterling," Elias said calmly. "It's a cold night. Would you like a cup of coffee at the bar? On the house. I don't want your pity coffee." Sterling spat. "I built this place. I gave my life to Le Summit. And you and this vulture." He pointed toward Arthur. "You stole it from me. You ruined my life over a spilled bottle of wine." Arthur stood up slowly. He didn't move toward Sterling, he simply stood in the light of the booth. The weight of his presence was enough to make Sterling stumble back a step. "I didn't ruin your life, Sterling," Arthur said, his voice echoing with a terrifying clarity. "You ruined it yourself, one insult at a time, for 10 years. The wine was just the catalyst. It was the moment the mask slipped and everyone saw the rot underneath. I was a professional." Sterling screamed. "A professional manages assets," Arthur countered. "A leader manages people. You failed at both. You looked at a young man with potential and saw a footstool. I looked at the same man and saw a partner." Arthur looked at Elias, then back at Sterling. "You are not a victim of a clumsy boy. You are a victim of your own ego. Now, you have two choices. You can accept the coffee Elias offered and leave quietly, or my security will ensure that your next meal is served in a cold cell for disturbing the peace." Sterling looked around the room. He saw the faces of the staff, the people he used to bully. They didn't look at him with hatred. They looked at him with something far worse, pity. He looked at the floor, expecting to see the mess he had once presided over. Instead, he saw something that made him freeze. Near booth 4, embedded in the dark, polished hardwood floor, was a small, circular section of clear resin. Beneath the resin, the original floorboards remained, still bearing the dark, jagged crimson stain of the 1982 Chateau Petrus that Elias had spilled 6 months ago. It was a monument. "Why?" Sterling whispered, staring at the stain. "Why would you keep that? It's a blemish. It's a mistake. It's a reminder," Elias said softly. "It reminds me that every great thing starts with a break. And it reminds me that no matter how high I get, I should never forget what it feels like to be on the floor, looking up at someone who wants to crush you." Sterling stood there for a long moment, the silence of the room finally pressing down on him. The fire in his eyes died out, replaced by a hollow, crushing realization of everything he had lost, not just a job, but his humanity. He didn't take the coffee. He turned around, pushed through the heavy doors, and disappeared back into the anonymous, biting cold of the Oak Haven winter. Elias took a deep breath and straightened his cuffs. He looked at the staff, who were waiting for his lead. "Table 12 needs more bread," Elias said with a wink. "And let's get a round of sparkling cider for the kitchen. We're having a great night." The restaurant surged back into life. The clink of glasses and the hum of conversation returned, louder and warmer than before. Arthur sat back down. He picked up his glass of wine, a modest, balanced Malbec that Elias had recommended earlier. He looked at the stain beneath the resin. "Elias," Arthur called out. The young manager turned back. Yes, sir. You never told me. Why did you really trip that night? Was it truly just the rug? Elias paused, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Truthfully, Mr. Pendelton? I saw a spider on the shoulder of the lady at table 5. I was trying to pivot so I could brush it off without her noticing and causing a scene. I saved her evening, but I lost the wine. Arthur laughed, a rare, genuine sound that came from deep in his chest. A protector even then. I knew I made the right choice. Arthur raised his glass toward the young man who had once ruined his suit and ended up saving his faith in people. To the spilled grapes, Elias. May they always lead to better vintages. To the vintage, Mr. Pendelton, Elias replied. As the snow continued to fall outside, the lights of the Pendelton and Vine stayed bright long into the night. It was more than a restaurant, it was a testament to the idea that a single mistake doesn't define a life but how you treat the person who made it just might.